Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the show. This is the Facts and Fallacies podcast, episode 300 and something, I think.
Unbelievable.
313?
Maybe.
313. We're moving right along. It's great that you guys are all here with us. Thank you so much. My name is Cameron English. That's Dr. Liza Dunn. Good to see you, Liza. How's it going?
Hi, fine. How are you? We had a great space today.
We sure did. It was respectful, but it was a very controversial topic. We talked about whether or not the government should fund science, which, as I've learned over the last week, is tantamount to heresy for a lot of people. Because I wrote an article about that, and that started the discussion. But a lot of people get really anxious when you start saying that researchers
You're going to take away their funding.
Yeah, or even just the funding of researchers whom they like.
Yes.
So anyways, it was a great conversation. Hopefully you'll go listen to it and read some of the content we discussed. Excellent. But this week here on the show, we're back to our normal 3-story approach. I can't say we're going to do it every week because we keep finding interesting people to talk to.
That's right. We find lots of interesting people.
Yes, indeed. But anyway, 3 stories. Let's jump into these. I know it's towards the end of the week and we've got limited time here, so we're going to be respectful. See, everyone's got dogs that need attention and babies, and that's the way it goes. Okay, first up, challenging simplistic activist narrative on calls for nutrient-dense foods and its attacks on industrial food, in quotes. Next up, does pornography alter your brain? And finally, music lover, it's in your genes. All right, nice mix of very important public health stuff and music in
Fun
your DNA.
topics.
Yeah. A little levity to to end the week. Okay, first story is by Dr. Kevin Folta, Liza's predecessor here on the podcast. This is a great article he wrote for GLP just earlier this week, and it's a fascinating story because I hear this all the time. I see it on social media constantly. It's this talk about nutrient-dense food, and we have these industrial products that are on store shelves, and people have been trained to eat them because they're just so yummy, and you can't say no because Doritos are just so good, chemically engineered to hook
tobacco.
you. Yeah. A few years ago, hilariously, Scientific American ran a story claiming that vegetables were becoming sugary, toxic snacks.
You can't make it up. You can't make it up.
And they were correctly pilloried for that foolishness because the study that they cited was didn't say what they said it said. But in more recent days, these claims are coming from the Make America Healthy Again movement. People like RFK, Callie and Casey Means, Mark Hyman, all of these people, right? They'll walk down the aisle of a grocery store and they'll pick up a bag of chips or something and they'll go, look at all these ingredients and all of these complex chemicals. There's no nutrients in these. There's just poison. And that's why you need to eat organic carrots or something like that. Kevin's points in this story are excellent, and he makes a number of important observations. So one of the things he says, and this is probably the running theme through the story, is you can have the most nutrient-dense food possible, but if no one eats it, either because it's too expensive or there's no way to transport it from the farm to where people can get it, or they don't have the money for it, or, interestingly, it doesn't look good or it doesn't taste good, then it doesn't matter how many nutrients are in the food. And so, as he explains in the story, there's a balance for the food system. So for farmers, for example, they sell more strawberries when they're plump, fat, bright, or like a dark red sort of a color. And when you bite into it, if it's soft and it's sweet, people will eat more of them. So even if you have a smaller strawberry that's a little more bitter or maybe a lot more bitter, and there's technically more nutrients in it, if people eat 2 of those versus 6 or 7, or whatever an appropriate serving is, if they eat more of the one that tastes better, they're actually getting more of the micronutrients, they're getting more of the macronutrients that they need because they're actually eating it.
And nuance, details.
Right. So this is a great example of a trade-off. Kevin doesn't use that language, but that's exactly what's going on here, right? Is you need to provide people the nutrients they need, but you need to bring it in a vehicle, so to speak, that they will actually consume. And that's a really important point. That's overlooked by all of these people, right? They emphasize, organic food or avoiding pesticides or whatever, right? Or don't eat chips. Make sure you eat celery. But they don't think about all of the things, and this has been really well researched too. We understand in a lot of ways why people find certain food appealing. And so that's what a lot of plant breeding is about, is coming up with varieties that farmers want to grow because they can actually sell them
Right.
to consumers. So what did you think of this?
Yeah, I think that that's a really important point. People forget that you need to have a whole variety of things to get fresh fruits and vegetables from the farm onto somebody's plate. And if you're an urban dweller, you've got a big, huge sort of process for harvesting and then transporting and then getting them on the shelf over time, and that requires a number of interventions that increase shelf life, a number of interventions that increase attractiveness, and then taste. And so they spend a lot of time trying to improve the taste and trying to improve the looks of fruits and vegetables, and so people will eat them, and that's the important part, is you do need people to consume them in order to have any benefit. If they're looking, small and looking worm eaten, sorry about the dogs, and all of that, you are not going to have as many people eating them. And we talk about food deserts, where we're trying to have more people who are at risk of micronutrient deficiencies and things like that have access to high quality fruits and vegetables, which are expensive to start out with. They're not going to buy them if they don't look attractive and they don't have a shelf life. They just won't. They can't afford to spend a substantial amount of their money on something that is going to go bad quickly.
Paradoxically, this is one of the reasons I don't buy a lot of really sweet fruits, because I'm enticed to eat more than I need, right? So you do need a certain amount of vitamin C, for example. But if you eat 12 oranges in a day, you're eating more vitamin C than you need, but then you're also getting a ton of sugar, even though there's fiber and other good things in fruit. So this is one reason I'll buy Granny Smith apples and I'll buy raspberries, because they're flavorful and they have the nutrients you need. But I'm not driven to eat like 2 pounds of
Of
raspberries.
fruit, yeah, that's
You know,
exactly right.
so that's an interesting confirmation of his point. Now, obviously, we want people to eat more fruits and vegetables because they are very nutritious, no doubt about it. But the other point that's important is that, like, the typical conventional strawberry or piece of corn or whatever, it's good for you. There's lots of nutrients in it. He gives the example of corn, which is conventionally bred hybrid corn, so not a GMO necessarily. It has 30% more protein than earlier varieties of corn had. Now, that's good for humans who eat corn, of course, but we feed corn to animals, which we then harvest. No, I don't know harvest, but right, we slaughter them for their meat, and that makes meat more affordable, which is good, right? If it costs less to feed the animals, then that savings is passed on to consumers. And of course, meat is very nutritious. That, as the term superfood is thrown around a lot, right?
That's right.
An 8-ounce piece of steak is very good for you. There's lots of nutrients in that. So if you can make options like that more affordable, the world will be better off.
That's exactly right. And people need to, in developing countries, you find that the kids don't often have enough protein in their diets. And so making something accessible to them that helps their brain growth, right, is critically important. Making it affordable is critically important. And animals like cattle can take compounds that we can't eat, like grass, and turn it into high quality protein that improves other people's diets. And there's vitamin B12 in there and a whole variety of things that you can't necessarily get from a vegan diet. So it's important. And then the more you can capitalize on that in terms of increasing the protein density within the plant that you won't necessarily eat. You're not going to eat grain that is fed to cattle. The more productive that animal gets in terms of its ability to turn that uh, plant into this high quality protein.
One final thing worth mentioning before we move on here that Kevin points out is that um, agricultural productivity, as we've talked about before, has absolutely exploded in the last 60 years or so. And so that's another worthwhile trade-off is that yes, in order to make, plumper pieces of fruit, there's more water, so there's a little bit less nutrient, not a significant amount. But one of the benefits of that is there's literally more food to go around. So the number of people who are experiencing hunger or starvation or dying from starvation has gone down significantly. I think it's still globally like 35,000 people. I think that's the statistic he has in the story. So that's significant. But nevertheless, the point is having no food is a greater problem than a strawberry that might have 1.5% less of a particular
Vitamin C or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah. So this is very much. I hate when people say like first world problems, but this is very much my basic needs are met, and now I'm finding other things to worry about. Kind of a concern.
Exactly. And if you want to talk about the true cost of colonialism, I mean, you have a whole bunch of Western elite folks who don't have to worry about what they're eating, trying to dictate to people who are at much higher risk of food insecurity how they should grow their food. And the people who don't grow food making those claims.
Indeed, the wannabe gods that have taken it upon themselves to dictate everybody's diet for all time because they know better, because they went to Brown or MIT or whatever their sociology degree is from, or their law degree.
Right.
Okay. Great article. Good just background understanding of why plant breeding is the way it is, why farmers desire the traits that they desire in the crops that they grow. It's just a sort of perspective that people need to understand. Before you start pontificating about food production and all this stuff, take it from a plant breeder and a farmer like Kevin that maybe you don't know as much as you think you know. So
that's exactly right.
Okay, moving on to a totally not awkward topic. This is originally from the Philly Voice. It's called Pornography May Be Commonplace, but Research Shows It Causes Lasting Harm to the Brain and Relationships. This is really interesting. This is by Daniel Sukanik, who is a marriage and family therapist, I believe, and also a professor at the University of Colorado. And so this story builds on a lot of research that I've looked into just out of sheer curiosity mostly. But what they found in a lot of the studies, and it's really hard to study pornography. I've mentioned this before, actually, but you actually can't do a clinical trial to study the effects of porn because you can't find a control group. Because the vast majority of men, definitely not me, not me at all, but the vast majority of men have consumed pornography, and not just once or twice, but in copious quantities, hours and hours over the, starting in the early teens and into their 20s and even longer in some cases. And so the ideal way to study this, if ethics weren't a concern, is you would take a control group that doesn't watch porn, and then you would take your study group and expose them to pornography for a set amount of time and see what the changes are. Mm-hmm. Now, again, and he mentions this in the story, that's probably ethically not cool, because if you're thinking that watching porn is bad for people, it would be wrong.
You're causing harm. Yeah.
Right. Same thing with like a clinical trial where you withhold a vaccine from somebody. If you know what I mean, like you don't deliberately, we have in the past, don't get me started on that, but you can't deliberately withhold medical treatment from someone if you think
exactly if it's protective in some capacity. That's right.
Anyways, but what you can do is you can look at survey data, and what you find in studies of this is that men report, even at a young age, they report experiencing symptoms of erectile dysfunction or other types of sexual dysfunction. They report dissatisfaction in their relationships and their marriages. They report more conflict with their spouses. And this is interesting because it goes to the hypothesis that he's pushing in this story, which is that when you consume porn, it actually rewires your brain in some important ways, and it desensitizes you to sex.
Yeah.
Like both watching it, like people start to escalate the stuff they watch to stranger and stranger things.
Yep.
Because it doesn't generate the same arousal that it first did when they first started watching porn. And then interestingly, it's so foreign, like it triggers the same sort of reaction in your brain apparently, but it's completely different from sexual activity. And so some men get to a point where they can't even have sex which is crazy. And so maybe you could talk a little bit about some of the brain changes. I'm trying to find the paragraph where he talks about it. But apparently there's shrinking gray matter in certain parts of the brain that are part of your reward system.
Yeah.
And this hasn't been demonstrated clearly. This is sort of a limitation with
I
these
think
brain.
this is like a hypothetical kind of situation, but I think that what happens is if you normalize um, behavior that is at first glance, at first blush, well, people have sex and this, that, and the other. But if you start normalizing behavior that gets increasingly more deviant, um, then I think it winds up having a negative impact on a whole lot of biologic functions. First of all, the relationship between men and women, or men and men, whomever you're having a relationship with, if sex becomes objectified, I think that it actually takes away some of the trust and intimacy that's involved in that. And so the fact that more and more younger people are consuming this because it's so easy to get access to winds up impacting negatively their early relationships and dating and things like that, because I think that they have um, I think more and more people are isolated while watching this stuff, and then their intimate relationships are compared to that, and so it can undermine the psychology that you develop during dating as a younger person, right? And how to interact with people when you're getting into this kind of behavior. The other thing that I have a very significant problem with is that it's you don't know who's being trafficked, and so you don't know if the person who who people are watching is a willing participant in this activity. And I think human trafficking is a huge moral issue of our time. And so if this is getting normalized in people's minds, then it kind of takes away the seriousness of human trafficking in people's minds. I don't know if I'm explaining this well, but I think that it's destructive to relationships, but I also think it's destructive to the normal moral fabric of a society when you normalize it. It destroys marriages, and it destroys healthy relationships. And when you're expecting this just very excessive kind of behavior, I think it takes away from the part of sex that has to do with love and trust and faithfulness and all of that. And so that's very squishy and not necessarily very scientific, but I think that the failure rate of so many marriages, you see an impact.
There's nothing squishy about it. I agree with you 100%. But if you want to look at it from an evolutionary perspective, I might sneeze in the next few seconds. I've got that
That's
tickle.
okay.
It's unpleasant. So just
Bless you.
if I interrupt my flow of thought with a mute button, that's what happened. From an evolutionary perspective, the purpose of sex is to facilitate pair bonding and
Mm-hmm.
reproduction. And the pair bonding is supposed to keep you and the other person together long enough to raise your
Your
offspring,
child, yeah.
which requires substantial investment of time and commitment and resources so they can go on and live independently, right? Now, there's nothing squishy. There's nothing moralistic about that. This is just the science of evolution. So,
Mm-hmm.
there's plenty of research that's been published on that. But that's an important point. And I think to your point about trafficking, there's a major porn website right now that's in the middle of a very expensive lawsuit. And they've actually opted to stop operating in certain states because the laws have been passed that are saying you need to verify that your performers, in quotes, are of legal age and that they're there willingly, because there is a ton of content on these free tube porn sites that involves children. It involves typically women who are there involuntarily. And the problem with the expanding use of it is that it's sort of, as you were trying to say, I think,
Mm-hmm.
is that it desensitizes you to what you may be consuming, right? You may not
Yes.
know unless you come across something that's truly like there's a child involved. You're not going to know that there's
Right.
anything untoward going on. And so this is one thing a lot of people who are in favor of legalizing prostitution or legal or expanding access to pornography, they don't really think about this, right? Like
No.
it becomes culturally acceptable, and then so do a lot of the harmful effects of it as well.
That's right.
And it's harder to address those. So that's an important point. But I don't know. I think it's very sensitive for one thing because, well, interestingly, let me say this first. I think a lot of men are uncomfortable talking about these kind of things. So the fact
Mm-hmm.
that they're coming to researchers and they're honestly saying, I'm 27 and I can't get an erection. Like that's really unheard of. I mean, you're the doctor, correct me, but my understanding is that erectile dysfunction is an old man's problem for the most part.
For the most part.
So when
But
you have,
if you need this, if you need extra help at younger and younger age because you're exposed to this over and over and over again, that's not
yeah,
healthy.
yeah. So there's that aspect of it, the fact that this is happening and you have some men willing to say it. But culturally, it's very unpopular to say anything that might be implicated or implying judgment of someone's decisions. That just gives us
Mm-hmm.
the heebie-jeebies today, which is really silly because you can't solve a lot of problems unless you're willing to
To
say,
discuss it, yeah.
yeah, yeah, and to maybe suggest that watching strangers have sex is not good for you.
That's right. That's right.
Anyways, I don't know. I guess this is one of those situations where we might not have the greatest data because it's just hard to study.
Yes.
The studies I found the section. So he cites a couple of studies, one from 2015, one from 2016. He says that one of the first brain scan studies on male porn users found a correlation between pornography use and reduced gray matter in the prefrontal cortex,
Prefrontal cortex, yeah.
and the decision
Probably the
making.
limbic system. So
Yeah. Sorry, I got confused. The prefrontal cortex, the decision making part of the brain, and the reward as more porn is consumed. So lower connectivity, I guess, is what he's saying.
So your prefrontal cortex is involved with your executive function. So your judgment and your, it kind of governs your behavior, whether or not it inhibits social behavior that is detrimental and things like that. And so if you are constantly stimulating the limbic system and the pleasure part of your brain, the ventral tegmental area and the nucleus accumbens, or the real parts of your brain where all that dopamine reward system keeps on reinforcing itself. If that's stimulated, then you. I don't know the mechanism by what this happens, but it may cause disinhibition because you're not relying on your frontal cortex as much. That's all theoretical. I don't know that you can get great data on this, and I don't know that, once again, correlation is anything to do with causation. And just looking at a lot of these scans, studies are not very reproducible. So it's theoretical. It kind of makes mechanistic sense, but it's also that's also addictive behavior, and it's directly feeding into the reward system of your brain that promotes addictive behavior.
Yeah, that's a good point. And interestingly, I think that has been capitalized on by people that are a little disingenuous because
Yes.
there are, believe it or not, I guess it's not surprising, there are trade groups for the porn industry and they will fund research vindicating their profession, surprisingly, right? Whoa. According to the porn industry funded study, porn is not that bad for you. But they will point to things like this. They'll say, these studies are not very high quality, and so you can't draw any conclusions, and therefore your teenagers should have porn on their mobile phone.
Which I think is completely destructive.
Right. So in other words, even if the brain changes might differ from population to population, or the effect is more heightened in one person or another, what these people are reporting is real. Like you can look at studies of married couples and they say, we love each other less because one of us watches porn constantly.
Right.
And you know what I mean? And the thing I was trying to say earlier is like if men are coming forward and talking about erectile dysfunction, that's not comfortable, right? So if they
Right.
are willing to say this, then there's probably some validity to it.
Some validity to, yeah, it being a problem.
Right. Yeah. It's not like when you ask someone how many Twinkies they eat and they're like, I mean, I might have one in the last 10 years or so, but
Right.
yeah. Anyways, really interesting story from the Philly Voice. And another thing I like, there's ample links to the research that this professor is citing. So you can actually track down the sources and follow up if you want. Okay. Final story of the day. As a lifelong musician, I love this one. It's just fun, interesting science. This is called Scientists Find Genetic Basis for How Much People Enjoy Music. This is by Eric W. Dolan, originally from SciPost. This is really cool. This was published in Nature Communications. It's a study of 9,000 pairs of twins.
Twins, yeah.
Yeah. So they had fraternal twins, which share about half of their genes, and then identical twins that share almost all their genes.
Mm-hmm.
And then they had them fill out a survey, which is meant to measure your interest in music. So different things like do you get joy out of listening to music with friends? You know, like going to a live concert, for example. What's your propensity to enjoy that? Do you like to sit by yourself and listen to music? These kind of questions, right? And what they found is that the identical twins were more likely to have the same perspective, the same opinion on music and how much they liked it. And there was more variance, I believe, in the fraternal twins. So the idea was and again, speaking of correlation and causation, when you're dealing with studies like this, there's often tons of genes involved. There's tons of mutations. There's all kinds of variability. But I think they said something like 50% of your interest in music is heritable. It's due to something in your genes, which is really fascinating. They say in the study, to their credit, this is not particularly surprising because almost all of your behaviors have some genetic component
To it, yeah.
Yeah. Every parent knows this. When you look at the way your kid smiles or says something or the way they dance, you're like, you got that from your mom or
That's
right?
exactly right.
Right. So there's definitely a genetic component. But it's interesting. They found that I think it was 5 different categories of the types of interest in music they were studying, and there was some overlap. But what they were able to find is there's certain genetic influences for each one, which is fascinating, right? So their hypothesis is that this has some sort of evolutionary advantage. Like music
Right.
facilitates community bonding, which brings you closer together with the people that you have to hunt with and that you have to defend against other tribes. And that starts to get a little more speculative as you get into the evolutionary psychology. But the immediate results they found here are pretty cool.
And it is kind of fascinating because if music's one of those things that you sort of go through life going, what does it really mean? You know what I mean? Why do people get joy out of this? Why do people find it? How does this bond people? But if you look at it, there's not necessarily a scientific real purpose for why it should exist, right? That it actually brings something meaningful in terms of from a purely scientific perspective, which is scientism, right? But it does it has incredible influence on mood, and it's one of the things that from a art perspective, you may be a really good scientist or you may be a really good carpenter or whatever, but music kind of transcends all of that. And from going all the way back to, classical music, people are still listening to that, all the way up into, more modern music and rock and roll and things like that. So why does music exist and what does it bring to society? Well, I think it brings incredible joy and it enhances culture and a whole variety of things. But there's not a real, I don't think, real scientific explanation for why it exists and why it does so much for people. So it's a kind of fascinating question. And the interesting thing about the genetics part is you really, because you always think about nurture versus nature, and identical twins are going to be different than fraternal twins, but that kind of controls for the environment, because if they grew up together, then you've got a similar environment. Now, it may be that they all grew up with lots of music in the home and they liked it. It's hard to say, but at least you've got that little bit of control there.
Yeah, I think there is always a temptation to over empiricize things, to like, we need to explain every facet of human behavior in molecular or evolutionary terms.
Right.
Sometimes that's helpful, and it gives you insight into why certain people behave the way they do. There's benefit on that. But when it comes to something like this, why do people love music so much? Because it rocks. Like, it's just,
that's exactly right.
You know what I mean?
It's like why do people like beauty? Right?
Yeah.
It's the same kind of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think creativity is just inherent in human nature, right? Like, and you can see this in our ancestors. They're sitting in caves, like, I should draw on the wall. Like, why?
That's exactly right.
Because it's just another way to communicate, whatever. But I notice, like, I'm going to go work out after we're done here, and I hate when I go out there at first. It's just really annoying. I have to do 30 minutes of cardio, and I hate it. But I put in my earbuds, and I put on, like, whatever music. Like, right now, I'm going through the heavy metal of my childhood phase. So, like, as soon as I put it on,
power through it.
Yes. Yeah. But, like, whatever chemical reaction, whatever biochemistry is going on up here, like, it just hits a switch, and I'm like, let's do this. Right.
Yeah.
And it makes the workout, if not enjoyable, I can get through it. I'm like, okay, I know I'm here, right? I'm here because I want to be healthy and whatever. But, the music is powerful. So that is pretty fascinating.
Yeah. Yep.
It is the limitations. Okay, right. So this was done in Sweden. Obviously, the world is not full of Swedes, as interesting as that would be. So this is a single population. There's probably a lot of variance in the kind of music they listen to, and of course their environment and those kinds of things. And then of course it's a self-report. So maybe people are telling the truth, maybe they're not. Who knows? Unlike our last story, where there's somewhat of an incentive to be honest because you're struggling with a real problem, here it could just be like, I don't know, I'll just fill this out for no reason or whatever. But it's interesting. It adds a little bit of depth to why people like music so much.
Yeah, it's a fun study.
Yeah, and there's no controversy. There's no like actually. Whatever.
That's exactly
right. We're going
right.
to turn your daughter into your son because.
That's exactly right. How can you politicize this?
Right.
Right.
Yeah. Some music is racist. There we go.
There you go.
NIH, write me a grant. I'll do the study. Okay. That's all we got. Thank you guys so much for joining us. Once again, this article is called "Scientists Find Genetic Basis for How Much People Enjoy Music." Go check that out. Go read the paper. It's not behind a paywall, so if you're feeling curious, you can go read the whole thing in Nature Communications. And we will see you next week. Follow us on social media. Until then, it's at Dr. Eliza MD. I'm at Cam J. English. Our spaces every Friday, 11 a.m. Central Time. We talk about all kinds of cool stuff. You're welcome to come share your opinion. Just do not be a huge jerk. Otherwise, we will kick you out.
Right. That's right.
All right. Thank you as always, and we will see you next time.
Take care.